Do you know that feeling? You wake up in the morning, and before your eyes even open, before the world has had a single chance to disappoint you today, the tiredness is already there. Not the tiredness of someone who stayed up too late, not the tiredness a good night's sleep can fix. The other kind, the kind that lives in your bones, the kind that follows you like a shadow you can't shake no matter how fast you run. You get up anyway. You do what needs to be done. You answer the messages. You show up where you're supposed to show up. You smile when the situation demands it. And underneath all of that, quiet, persistent, relentless, there's a voice. A low voice asking the same question over and over again. When does this end? If you recognized yourself in those words just now, this video was made specifically for you. Not to hand you a list of morning habits. Not to tell you to think positive, but to show you a completely different way of understanding what's happening inside you, a way of seeing that is more than 500 years old, and that once you truly understand it has the power to change everything. But before I show you what that is, I need to ask you something first. What if the thing you've been trying so hard to fix was never actually broken? Stay with me, because the answer to that question is going to surprise you. There is a Japanese technique called Kintsugi, and before you roll your eyes and think, oh great, another self-help concept with a foreign name, let me tell you what Kintsugi actually is, because it is nothing like what you expect. Kintsugi is the ancient art of repairing broken ceramics, but not with clear glue, not with resin designed to make the crack invisible, with gold deliberately, purposefully, so that every fracture, every single place where the object shattered, is not hidden but highlighted. The crack becomes the most beautiful part of the piece, and the philosophy behind this practice is so simple, so quiet, and yet so completely opposite to everything you have ever been taught about pain, about weakness, about starting over, that when it truly lands, it doesn't just change how you think, it changes how you breathe. But here's what I haven't told you yet. Here's the part that stops most people cold when they first hear it. This philosophy doesn't promise to return you to who you were before, because what if going back is the wrong destination entirely? Recent research on emotional recovery has revealed something that startles most people when they first encounter it. The majority of individuals who have lived through severe depression genuinely believe they will never be the same person they were before their breakdown. And those people are completely right. They're just catastrophically wrong about what that means. You are not going back to who you were. You are becoming something that person, the one you were before, could never have been. Something stronger, something richer, something that carries gold in its cracks. But to feel that in your body rather than just understand it in your head, I need to tell you Grace's story. And I promise you, by the time this story ends, you will never look at your own cracks the same way again. Chapter: The Weight No One Sees. Grace was 30 years old, and she carried the exhaustion of someone who had already lived 3 lifetimes. Not the kind of tiredness that disappears after a long weekend. The other kind, the kind you feel in your bones when you wake up in the morning. The kind that was there before the alarm went off, and would still be there long after you fell back asleep. She grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, in a house where the silence was somehow louder than any argument could have been. Her father left when she was 6 years old. No explanation, no goodbye note, no dramatic scene to give her something to process later. One day he was simply there, and the next day, he was simply gone, and nobody in that house ever spoke about it, as if it were a wound too deep to touch. Her mother, Linda, was the kind of woman people describe as strong. She worked double shifts at a health clinic, came home with feet that ached through the soles and still somehow tried to keep everything together. Grace admired her mother with everything she had. But children don't just need love, they need presence. And presence was the one thing that house could never seem to afford. The uncles, the cousins, the weekend relatives who arrived with their opinions fully formed and left behind something that would take years to name. That girl is just like her father. She'll end up exactly the same way you watch. Did you see the way she looks at you? Like there's nothing behind the eyes. I don't know what Linda expects from that child. Grace heard every single word. Children always do. And what she heard year after year was a story about herself. A story that said she was too much, not enough, a burden, a problem, a shadow of someone who had already failed before she had even begun. She carried that story like a stone inside her chest, heavy, constant, invisible to everyone who looked at her from the outside. By college, she had learned to outrun it. She worked hard, graduated in communications, landed a position at a small agency. From the outside, everything appeared to be working. On the inside, it was like trying to carry water in cupped hands. No matter how carefully she moved, she was always losing more than she could hold. At 27, sitting in a doctor's office, she finally got a name for it: depression, generalized anxiety disorder. And with the name came hope. Finally a diagnosis, finally answers, finally perhaps a way through. But what came next was something Grace never saw coming. Chapter 20: Every door, every dead end. Grace tried everything, and I am not using that word loosely. She tried support groups, Tuesday nights in a church basement, folding chairs in a circle, people sharing stories that sounded frighteningly similar to her own. She would leave those meetings feeling, for a few hours at least, like she wasn't completely alone. And then Wednesday morning would arrive, and the emptiness would return exactly as large as it had been before. She tried 3 different psychologists over 2 years. 1 was genuinely good, 2 were average, but all 3 eventually reached a point where the conversations became circular, where Grace felt less like she was making progress and more like she was narrating her own life story into a mirror that reflected nothing back. She tried medication, multiple medications, adjusted doses, switched formulations, started over. Some combinations removed the pain, yes, but they removed everything else along with it. The ability to feel joy, to feel anger, to feel anything human enough to recognize as her own. And Grace was left sitting with a question that had no clean answer. What is worse? Feeling everything, or feeling nothing at all? She wasn't giving up. That's the crucial thing to understand. She wasn't lazily surrendering. This was the exhaustion of someone who gave everything they had, every ounce of effort, every fragment of hope, and then looked down at their own empty hands and genuinely could not understand what they had done wrong. It was a Thursday night. She was scrolling through Instagram, not looking for anything, just filling the silence of her apartment, when a single image stopped her mid-scroll. A ceramic bowl, broken, clearly, visibly, undeniably broken, and yet glued back together with something that looked like liquid gold, veins of it running through every crack like rivers on an ancient map. The caption beneath it read, "Kintsugi Workshop, Saturday 10 a.m. limited spaces." Grace didn't research what Kintsugi was. She didn't read reviews or check if Saturday fit her schedule. She signed up before her brain could talk her out of it. Sometimes intuition moves faster than fear. What she had no way of knowing in that moment was that this single impulsive decision was about to introduce her to a woman who would change the entire direction of her life. Chapter 3: The Woman Who Repairs with Gold. The workshop was held in a small studio in Ohio City. 12 chairs around long wooden tables, fragments of broken pottery arranged in front of each seat, pots of lacquer and gold dust in the center of the room. Grace arrived 5 minutes late. She always did. Chose a chair closest to the door. She always did that too. One foot perpetually pointed toward the exit, and stared down at the broken pieces in front of her without touching them. The woman leading the workshop was Japanese, around 60 years old, white hair pulled into a simple bun, hands that moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had learned long ago exactly what they were doing. Her name was Naoko. Naoko didn't open with technique. She didn't explain the history or the process. She opened with a question. Has anyone here ever broken something they loved and thrown it away because they believed it could never be the same again? Almost every hand in the room went up, Grace's included. Naoko nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had already known before anyone arrived. Me too, she said quietly. For a long time I believed the problem was with me. I didn't yet understand that the problem was with how I had been taught to see broken things. She explained. Kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing shattered ceramics with lacquer mixed with gold, silver or platinum, was a technique more than 500 years old, and it was built on a philosophy that contradicts almost everything Western culture teaches about damage and repair. In the West, said Naoko, when something breaks, there are 2 choices: throw it away, or glue it back together so perfectly that no one can tell it was ever broken. We hide the evidence. We treat the crack as something shameful. She lifted a broken fragment up toward the light. In Kintsugi, we do the opposite. We fill each crack with gold. We make the fracture visible, not to commemorate the breaking, but to say this object has lived. This object has been through something real. And that something made it unrepeatable. Grace felt something shift inside her chest. Not pain, not anxiety. Something she didn't immediately recognize because it had been absent for so long. It was recognition. But she had no idea yet just how deep that recognition was about to go. Chapter 4: Day. What Naoko saw when the workshop ended. The other participants gathered their repaired pieces and drifted into easy conversation. Grace stood alone, staring at the bowl she had mended. Golden veins ran through the ceramic in every direction. Irregular, asymmetrical, completely unrepeatable. The piece wasn't perfect. It was alive. She found Naoko before she could stop herself. You made it look beautiful, Grace said, fighting to keep her voice steady. But what if what's broken isn't a bowl? Naoko looked at her, not the polite half-listening look of someone waiting for their turn to speak. The real kind. The kind that sees you. Do you have time right now? Naoko asked. Yes, then come have tea at my house, 10 minutes from here. And just like that, without ceremony, without planning, Grace walked into the life of a woman who was about to hand her something no therapist, no medication, no support group had ever been able to give her. Naoko's home was small and dense with ceramics. Pieces covered every surface, every shelf. Some were flawless. Most carried golden veins that traced their fractures like constellations across a night sky. Grace moved through the room slowly, studying each piece as if reading sentences in a language she was just beginning to understand. When they sat with their tea, Naoko didn't ask what had happened to Grace. She asked something far more interesting. "When you look at those cracks, what do you feel?" Grace was quiet for a long moment. "I feel like those are the most honest parts of the piece," she finally said. Naoko smiled. The particular smile of someone who had been waiting for precisely that answer. "No, tell me about yours." Chapter 5. Golden Fractures. Grace told her everything. Her father who disappeared without explanation. Her mother who stayed but was too exhausted to be truly present. The uncles and their words. Those small, casual cruelties that stuck to the walls of a child's interior like smoke stains. The depression that crept in so slowly she didn't notice until it had already taken up residence. The years of trying. The therapists and the medications and the adjustment of doses and the particular exhaustion of effort without return. The fear, quiet but constant, that she had reached some final edge. Naoko listened without a single interruption. When Grace finished, the room held a silence that didn't need filling. Then Naoko spoke. "You came here believing you were looking for a cure. But I think what you were actually searching for was a different way of seeing what happened to you." "What's the difference?" Grace asked. "A cure attempts to return you to who you were before. A different way of seeing transforms what you've been through into part of who you are now." Naoko rose and lifted one of the golden veined bowls from the shelf. This bowl was 200 years old when it shattered. The craftsman who repaired it could have discarded it. It would have been simpler, cheaper, more practical. But he understood something that most people still haven't grasped. The value of this bowl was never in its perfection. It was in the history it carried, and the fracture was not a subtraction from that history. It was an addition to it. Grace looked at the bowl for a long time. "Are you telling me I don't need to be healed?" "I'm telling you that perhaps you already are, but you're still trying to erase the marks instead of filling them with gold." And here is where science steps in to confirm what Naoko's hands already knew. Clinical psychologist Bessel van der Kolk, who spent decades studying trauma and recovery, has stated that the goal of healing is not to erase the past. It is to transform the person's relationship with what happened. Healing is not the absence of pain. It is the capacity to carry your story without being destroyed by it. Research from Tel Aviv University on post-traumatic growth found that between 35 and 70% of people who survived highly adverse experiences reported meaningful positive personal growth afterward, not despite the trauma, but because of it. When we integrate a painful experience into our own narrative, rather than spending our energy trying to amputate it, the brain reconstructs its connections in ways that are denser, more resilient, and more sophisticated than before. You don't return to what you were. You become something that wasn't possible before the breaking. Kintsugi has been saying this for 500 years. Neuroscience is only now catching up. Chapter 6. 4 Philosophies, One Direction. In the weeks that followed, Grace returned to Naoko's home on Saturdays. Not every week without exception. There were good weeks and there were weeks where the void returned and filled the apartment like a tide coming in. But she kept coming back. And Naoko kept teaching, never all at once. Always slowly, like someone planting seeds that need time and dark soil before anything appears above the ground. The first thing Naoko taught was mono no aware. In Japanese, she explained one afternoon while the tea cooled between them. This expression describes the melancholy of things, the awareness that everything is passing, that beautiful moments end, but so do the unbearable ones, and that there is a quiet grace available to us when we stop fighting against this truth. Grace looked out the window. Outside, October leaves were releasing from their branches. That sounds sad. It is and it isn't. It's the same quality of sadness you feel watching cherry blossoms fall. You know they're ending, and precisely because you know they're ending, you are completely present for them while they're still there. And something unlocked in Grace that afternoon that 2 full years of therapy had never reached. Recovery was not linear, because life was not linear. A bad day following a good day was not failure. It was the nature of things, and her furious demand that improvement be constant and relentless, that she always be getting better, never worse, had been grinding her down just as surely as the depression itself. The second thing Naoko taught was Wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection, the grace of what is incomplete. A garden not fully pruned, a ceramic tile with edges no machine could replicate, a wall carrying the texture of time without apology. What does any of that have to do with depression? Grace asked with the direct skepticism Naoko had by now come to genuinely appreciate. It has to do with comparison. You measure yourself constantly against an idealized version of yourself, the person you believe you should already have become. Wabi-sabi says that incompleteness is not a deficiency, it is the natural state of everything that is still alive. Grace was quiet for a long moment. My mother used to say I had untapped potential. She said it when I was 8. I heard it every year after that. And you internalized that as proof of your own inadequacy, wasn't it? It was a sentence an exhausted woman said to a child she loved deeply but didn't know how to reach. Nothing more, nothing less. The third philosophy arrived on one of Grace's worst mornings. She called Naoko at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, voice shaking, unable to make herself get out of bed. Naoko did not tell her to get up, stay in bed. But tell me, is there one thing, just one thing you could do today that is small enough that it wouldn't feel impossible? Grace thought about it. Maybe. Then open the window. This was Ikigai, not the version that appears on motivational posters asking you to map out your grand cosmic purpose. The original. The one researchers discovered when studying why people in Okinawa lived so long and so well. For these people, Ikigai was not a mission statement. It was breakfast. It was the neighbor who passed by every afternoon. It was the plant on the windowsill that needed water. That was enough for today. And the next day, enough again. Naoko understood something about Grace's depression that Grace herself had never been able to articulate. That rebuilding a future needed to happen in doses small enough that the illness couldn't consume them all at once. Not one enormous purpose, an open window, a replied message, a glass of water, brick by brick in whatever direction you can manage. Chapter 7. The day she broke again 3 months after their first meeting, Grace shattered. It happened on a Friday evening. A promotion she had been quietly, carefully hoping for over the course of a full year went to someone else. She got home, locked the door behind her, and found herself sitting on the bathroom floor. For how long she couldn't say, unable to stop crying. And the voice returned, the voice of her uncles, the voice that said she was exactly what they had always said she would be. She called Naoko. Naoko answered before the second ring had finished. She listened to everything, every word of it, and when Grace went silent, Naoko said something Grace would remember for the rest of her life. Grace, you are on the bathroom floor right now. I know, but you called silence. Do you understand what that means? What does it mean? The version of you that existed before any of this, she wouldn't have called. She would have stayed silent on that floor until the weight became unbearable and there was no one left to call. But you called. That is the gold in the crack. You just filled a new fracture with gold without even knowing you were doing it. Grace took a long, slow breath. I don't want to keep breaking. I know. But Kintsugi is not a promise that you'll never break again. It's a promise that each time you do, you'll know what to do with the pieces. And here is the thing that almost no one says out loud when talking about recovery. The greatest obstacle is not the pain itself. It is the shame. Researchers at Brown University found that individuals who experience shame about their own suffering are twice as unlikely to respond to treatment compared to those who don't carry that shame. Not because shame is more powerful than medication or therapy, but because shame is what prevents someone from asking for help in the first place, from accepting it when it's offered, from believing at the most fundamental level that they deserve it at all. And the antithesis of shame is not confidence, it is not self-esteem, it is radical acceptance. The willingness to say this happened to me. The marks are real, and those marks do not subtract from my value. They are part of my value. That is what Kintsugi has been quietly insisting for 5 centuries. The problem was never that the ceramic broke. The problem was the idea that broken ceramic is worth less than whole ceramic. Chapter 86 months later, Grace was not cured. Let that be said plainly, because any script that promises a clean, total, permanent cure is offering you something that does not exist. What happened instead was different, and in many ways far more powerful. She returned to therapy, but this time she walked through the door carrying something she hadn't possessed before, a different internal structure. She wasn't arriving to be fixed. She was arriving to better understand the golden veins that were already forming through her own fractures. She started working with clay, not specifically because of Kintsugi, but because hands occupied with shaping something are hands that aren't still enough to be ambushed by their own thoughts. She wrote a letter to her mother, not to accuse, to understand. Her mother read it and cried and said, very quietly, that she had never realized how much damage words spoken out of exhaustion could do to a child who was listening. She didn't forgive her uncles all at once. Forgiveness doesn't follow a linear schedule either, but she began to understand something important. Their words weren't the truth about her. They were the truth about their pain, their limitations, their own unexamined cracks. And one afternoon, sitting across from Naoko over tea that had gone cold while they talked, Grace said, I still have bad days, and I know. But on the bad days now I can remember that they're just days. Naoko nodded. That is no aware. You've learned to allow things to be fleeting without needing to control them. I learned because you taught me, no, said Naoko, shaking her head. I showed you a golden bowl. You did the learning yourself. What cracks teaches researcher Kristen Neff, who spent decades studying self-compassion at the University of Texas, describes something that sits at the heart of everything we've explored today. Self-compassion is not weakness. It is the capacity to treat yourself with the same quality of care you would offer a close friend who is suffering. And it is precisely this capacity, not the absence of pain, but the refusal to add shame on top of it, that allows human beings to survive difficult experiences without being permanently destroyed by them. People with high levels of self-compassion recover from losses, failures, and trauma significantly faster, not because they feel less, because they don't compound the suffering by turning it into evidence of their own unworthiness. Kintsugi, in its essence, is a self-compassion practice with 500 years of history behind it. It doesn't ask you to be strong. It asks you to be honest about what broke, about where the fractures run, and then to bring gold to those places rather than hiding them under layers of pretending they don't exist. Grace is 31 now. She still sees a therapist. She still has difficult weeks. She still carries the weight of a childhood that should have been gentler than it was. But she also has something sitting on the table in her apartment, a ceramic bowl with veins of gold running through it in every direction. The same bowl she repaired that first Saturday afternoon in Naoko's workshop, on the day she almost didn't go at all. And on the hardest days, the days when the weight returns and the voice from her uncle's mouth comes back, she looks at that bowl and she remembers the most beautiful parts of it are the parts that were broken. Not despite the cracks, because of them. If you're here today because you're also carrying something that feels too heavy for one person, if you have tried things and been exhausted by the trying, if the tiredness is the kind that's already there before you open your eyes in the morning, then let me tell you what Kintsugi would say to you right now. You are not too broken to be repaired. You are broken in a way that demands gold, not cheap adhesive, not invisible resin gold. And the difference between those two kinds of repair changes everything about what you become on the other side of it. Kintsugi teaches that fractures don't require concealment. The wound can be gilded. What broke inside you is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence that you survived something real. And that survival is not an exception to be erased from your story. It is the most important chapter of it. Mono no Aware reminds you that good days pass, and so do bad ones. You don't need to be okay every single day. You need to be present on the day that you're in. Wabi-sabi releases you from comparing yourself to a perfect version of yourself that doesn't exist and never will. Incompleteness has its own beauty. What is still forming has its own value. Ikigai tells you that purpose doesn't need to arrive as a grand revelation. It can arrive as an open window, a glass of water, a single phone call made, the smallest possible reason to reach tomorrow, and then the day after that. And this, finally, is the thing that no one tells you at the beginning. You don't need to heal before you can start over. You start over, and in the starting over, you heal. If this reached you at a difficult moment, I want to ask you something. In the comments below, what is the crack you've been working hardest to keep hidden? You don't need to explain it. One word is enough. Thank you for watching this far. That kind of attention is not a small thing, and I know it costs something to give it. If you want to continue this journey, the next video is already waiting for you on screen. And until then, be present, walk with honor, and follow the path.